In June 1942, one Bristol Beaufighter flew into occupied Paris, not to bomb the city, but to drop the French tricolour on the Arc de Triomphe. Then its two-man crew tore down the Champs-Élysées at reported rooftop height, looking for a German parade that had vanished. The operation had a deliberately small name: Squabble. On 12th of June 1942, Flight Lieutenant Alfred Kitchener, Ken, Gatward, sat in the pilot's seat. Behind him was Sergeant Gilbert Fern, known to his squadron colleagues as George, acting as navigator and handling the mission's two most unusual weapons: two weighted sections cut from a single French tricolour. Their aircraft was a Bristol Beaufighter MKIC of No. 236 Squadron, RAF Coastal Command. Twin-engined, heavily armed, built around 4 forward-firing 20mm cannon and crewed by 2 men. It wasn't a mosquito. One Beaufighter was being sent toward the capital of occupied France. The intended target was a German troop formation, said by Allied intelligence to parade along the Champs-Élysées around midday. Gatward would fly low enough to avoid attracting attention until the last possible moment, fire on the troops, then turn on a second target: the former French Ministère de la Marine on Place de la Concorde, then being used as German naval headquarters. But the plan also carried an argument in cloth. A French flag was to appear above the Arc de Triomphe, the monument beneath which France's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier lay. A second was to be released over German naval headquarters. The operation was planned, and later remembered, as a morale mission as much as a strike, a demonstration that Britain could still reach Paris and that occupied France had not been abandoned. That was the logic of Operation Squabble. A single aircraft would be impossible to ignore if it appeared in the right place. The crew had prepared for it carefully. Gatward was already an experienced low-level pilot, having flown daylight attacks earlier in the war. Fern had to navigate them across the Channel, through northern France, into a city they couldn't safely view from altitude, then release heavy folded cloth into a violent slipstream from the rear of the aircraft. They had rehearsed. One account places their gunnery practice against a shipwreck in the English Channel. The flag sections were tested before the raid because an ordinary flag released from a fast aircraft could twist, fold, or simply fall uselessly. The tricolour had been obtained in Portsmouth, cut into 2 sections, weighted, folded, and loaded into the Beaufighter's flare chutes. Gatward later explained the purpose plainly. The sections were weighted and folded so they'd stream as soon as they were released. That sentence makes the mission clearer than any grand speech could. The flags weren't ceremonial baggage. Their shape, weight, folding and release mechanism had been planned like weapons. An earlier attempt on 13th of May 1942 had failed because weather over the French coast made the route too dangerous. The crew returned. A low-level attack depended on visibility, but visibility also exposed a lone aircraft to fighters, anti-aircraft guns, and every observer along its path. On 12th of June, they went again. At 11:29, Gatward and Fern took off from RAF Thorney Island in Sussex. RAF Northolt would be their recovery airfield later that afternoon, but it wasn't where Operation Squabble began. The Beaufighter crossed the English Channel at extreme low level. Later accounts describe it skimming at wave-top height, then hedge-hopping across northern France. Exact altitudes vary from telling to telling, but the central fact does not. Gatward kept the aircraft below the height at which it could be easily seen from far away or cleanly tracked from above. The aircraft's route wasn't a straight line drawn across a modern map. At low level, landmarks mattered more than compass lines. The crew used the terrain, roads, rivers, towns, and finally, Paris itself. Rouen appears in several later reconstructions, including Rouen Aerodrome, then a Luftwaffe field. It's a striking detail, but the larger point is stronger. Gatward and Fern crossed northern France in one aircraft without being stopped before they reached the capital. The Beaufighter had no escort. No formation surrounded it. There was no second aircraft waiting behind it if the first went down. 2 men flew toward Paris with 4 cannon in the nose, a camera, maps, and 2 pieces of the French flag. Gatward later remembered the Eiffel Tower as a navigational landmark. At that distance, the tower wasn't a tourist landmark. It was the navigational point that told them Paris was ahead. He had never visited the city before. Yet he and Fern had studied guidebooks and photographs before taking off, because their route through central Paris couldn't be improvised at rooftop level. The Eiffel Tower gave Fern and Gatward their orientation. They circled it low, then began to line up for the Arc de Triomphe. The geometry of Paris mattered. The Arc stood at the western end of the Champs-Élysées. From there, the avenue ran east toward Place de la Concorde, where the former Ministry of the Navy stood. The route connected the mission's 3 acts: French memory at the Arc, the expected German parade on the Champs-Élysées, and German naval headquarters at the far end. First came the Arc. At low level, Gatward brought the Beaufighter toward the monument. Fern prepared the first section of the tricolour in the flare chute. Gatward later recalled asking, "Are you ready for the first flag?" Fern's answer captured the physical reality inside the aircraft. "Yes, I'm all ready, but the slipstream is nearly breaking my arm." He was pushing a weighted, folded French flag into rushing air from a flying combat aircraft. The propellers, engines, and airframe were producing enough force to make the release difficult even before enemy fire entered the story. Gatward crossed over the Arc de Triomphe. Fern released the first tricolour. The aircraft couldn't stop. It couldn't circle safely to inspect the result. It couldn't hover above the monument and watch where the fabric settled. Gatward and Fern had to continue flying. That uncertainty has become part of the story. Later accounts claimed the flag fell on the tomb of the unknown soldier beneath the Arc. Gatward himself was more careful. He said they couldn't see where it landed, then added that Vichy reports claimed it fell right on the tomb of the unknown warrior, which is of course just where we wanted it to be. The precise resting place can't be proven from the available record. The release can. A British Beaufighter had crossed into occupied Paris. Over one of France's most important monuments, Fern had pushed a weighted section of French tricolour into the slipstream. For a few seconds, the mission's central object was no longer inside the aircraft. It was falling through the air above the Arc de Triomphe. That mattered because the Arc had been claimed visually by the occupation. German forces had paraded on the Champs-Élysées after entering Paris in June 1940. The avenue was one of the city's grand ceremonial spaces, and German formations used it as a public stage of conquest. Operation Squabble aimed to interrupt that image. The British crew now turned toward the Champs-Élysées, expecting the raid's main military target to be below them. Allied intelligence had reported a routine German parade around midday. The plan was to fly down the avenue and strafe the troop formation with the Beaufighter's 4 20mm cannon. At this height, the avenue became an obstacle course. Gatward later described watching for chimney pots, rooftops, and steeples. The aircraft was travelling between buildings, close enough that every small misjudgment carried consequences. A Beaufighter was a large, twin-engined combat aircraft, not a light sports machine. Its pilot had to maintain speed, direction, altitude, and awareness of the city below, while looking for troops that were supposed to be in the open. The Champs-Élysées was empty of the target they had crossed the channel to find. No formed German parade stood on the avenue. No column of troops marched beneath them. The raid's central strike target was absent. The parade wasn't there when the crew arrived. The available account does not explain why. That is where the record ends. Some later retellings say the parade had been cancelled. Others suggest the intelligence timing was wrong. A few claim troops were assembling somewhere else. None of those explanations is supported by a German order, a French police report, a municipal document, or a confirmed occupation record explaining what happened on 12th of June 1942. There is no evidence that German authorities had been warned. There is no evidence of a leak. There is no evidence that the empty avenue was a trap. The crew had expected German troops. They found none. How did the raid continue after its intended target disappeared? The answer lay at Place de la Concorde. The mission had been planned with a secondary target, the former Ministère de la Marine, the French Ministry of the Navy. During the occupation, the building was being used by the German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, as headquarters in Paris. Popular versions of the story sometimes call it Gestapo headquarters. The better supported identification is German naval headquarters in the former ministry building. Gatward turned the Beaufighter away from the empty parade route and set up for the attack. The Arc de Triomphe had been the symbolic peak. The Ministry of Marine would prove the aircraft had not come to Paris only to make a gesture. Gatward later recalled seeing the building easily and turning north toward the opera area before setting up another approach. He and Fern had a target that was large, known, and directly tied to the German occupation of the city. The Beaufighter came in low. Gatward lined up on the ministry building. In an aircraft moving fast at rooftop height, it was only moments from firing range to the building itself. Then Gatward opened fire. 4 20mm cannon fired at the former Ministry of Marine. The records support the cannon attack. They don't support a casualty count. They don't establish how many rounds hit, how much damage was done, or what German authorities reported afterward. Some later accounts describe sparks on the facade, shattered windows, and scattered sentries, but the confirmed story does not need those additions. A lone RAF aircraft fired on German naval headquarters in central occupied Paris. During or immediately after that cannon pass, Fern released the second weighted section of the French tricolour over or near the building. The two pieces of cloth had different targets. The first was released over the Arc de Triomphe, where French national memory and the tomb of the unknown soldier gave the act its emotional weight. The second followed cannon fire at a building occupied by the German Navy. One flag carried solidarity, the other arrived with gunfire. This wasn't conquest, it was a deliberately visible intrusion. Gatward's later recollection gives a glimpse of what that flight looked like from inside the Beaufighter. He remembered the aircraft clearing the ministry roof at very low level. Fern, dealing with the second flag, was also watching the city below. Gatward described people in streets looking up and faces at windows. He said civilians waved. That detail comes from Gatward's recollection, not a citywide measure of public reaction. We can't know how many Parisians saw the aircraft, saw the flags, understood the raid, or heard about it afterward. No surviving body of civilian diaries, police reports, clandestine newspapers, or German records in the available evidence tells us how the city as a whole received Operation Squabble. But the mission had been designed to be seen. Its targets weren't hidden rail yards or remote depots. They were Parisian landmarks, the Arc de Triomphe, the Champs-Élysées, and Place de la Concorde. Its weapons were cannon and cloth. Its audience was occupied France. The strange force of Operation Squabble comes from that contrast. A normal attack raid seeks to destroy a target, measure results, and return. This one carried a military target list, but it also carried a French flag cut into two sections and weighted so it would open in the air. The flags were meant to be public. The cannon fire was meant to show reach. Together, they turned a missed parade into something the original plan couldn't have fully predicted. The expected German formation never appeared, but Gatward and Fern had still flown across the Channel, entered Paris at extreme low level, released a tricolour over the Arc de Triomphe, fired on German naval headquarters, and dropped a second tricolour over or near the German-occupied Ministry building. The absence of the parade didn't erase any of that. It changed the character of the mission. Instead of a surprise strafing attack on troops marching below, Operation Squabble became a raid defined by symbols that couldn't be mistaken for ordinary bombing. The flags made the point visible. The choice of the Arc and the Ministry made it legible. A single Beaufighter couldn't liberate Paris in June 1942. It could show that the German occupation didn't make Paris unreachable. The crew had little time to linger. In that span, Fern navigated the aircraft into the city, handled the first tricolour release, watched for threats, likely took photographs, prepared the second flag, and released it over the naval headquarters. Gatward flew the Beaufighter at extreme low level around some of Europe's most recognisable monuments while managing the attack. 5 or 6 minutes. That is shorter than the time many people spend walking around the Arc de Triomph's traffic circle today. Yet within those minutes, the crew travelled from the Eiffel Tower to the Arc, down the Champs-Élysées and toward Place de la Concorde before turning for England. The return route carried its own danger. A lone aircraft leaving Paris still had to cross northern France, reach the coast, cross the Channel, and land safely. Gatward and Fern had no indication that the occupation's defences would remain quiet simply because they had completed the attack. Some later accounts mention light anti-aircraft fire over Paris and a bird strike on the starboard radiator. Gatward did mention tracer passing close to the aircraft, but no hit. The bird strike story is repeated in later reconstructions, though the available record does not establish it with the same certainty as the mission itself. The confirmed ending is cleaner. The Beaufighter got home. At 13:53 on the 12th of June 1942, Gatward and Fern landed at RAF Northolt. They had departed Thorney Island at 11:29. Their recovery at Northolt closed a sortie that had crossed from England into occupied France, reached the centre of Paris, and returned without the aircraft being lost. The distinction between those two airfields matters. Thorney Island was the launch point. Northolt was where they landed after the raid. By the time the wheels touched down, the aircraft had completed a mission that sounds implausible even when every unsupported embellishment is stripped away. 1 Bristol Beaufighter, 2 crewmen. 1 French flag divided into 2 weighted sections. 1 pass over the Arc de Triomphe. 1 empty Champs-Élysées. 1 cannon attack on German naval headquarters. Then the flight home. Gatward received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Fern was granted a commission after the operation. Later accounts often state that Fern also received the Distinguished Flying Medal, but the available official material is firmer on his commission than on a DFM citation. Recognition came later, not on the runway that afternoon. The survival of both men mattered because it allowed Gatward to describe the mission in his own words. He remembered low flying over fields, the Eiffel Tower serving as a navigational guide, Fern fighting the slipstream as he released the flag, and the Ministry of Marine as a building they had specifically wanted to find. His account also shows restraint. Gatward didn't claim to have watched the first flag land on the tomb of the unknown soldier. He said they couldn't stop to see. He didn't pretend the crew had found the parade. He described the city as a place through which they moved quickly, too low and too fast to observe everything. That restraint is important because Operation Squabble has attracted legends. Stories of German troops scattering, bands diving for cover, vast crowds cheering, and the parade being disrupted by the raid have grown around it. Some may contain fragments of truth. The confirmed record does not need them. The evidence supports something already remarkable. The operation had been conceived as a morale and propaganda incursion. It combined a planned attack on German troops with an overt display of French national colours. Contemporary and later RAF-linked accounts consistently describe its purpose as showing solidarity with occupied France and reminding Parisians that Britain had not forgotten them. We can say that was the mission's intent. We can't calculate its exact effect on French morale. There is no reliable number for how many people saw the Beaufighter. There is no verified city-wide reaction. No document allows us to measure whether the raid changed Parisian morale on 12th of June, 13th of June, or any later day. But morale operations are often built around something harder to measure than damage: visibility. The German occupation had made its own visibility part of its power. Uniforms in cafes, headquarters in French buildings, German signs on Paris streets, military ceremonies on famous avenues. The occupation wasn't merely a military fact, it was a daily display. Operation Squabble answered with a display of its own. A British aircraft crossed into the city in daylight. It placed French colours over the Arc de Triomphe. It flew the Champs-Élysées so low that Gatward later recalled worrying about rooftops and steeples. It fired its cannon at a German naval headquarters in the former Ministry of Marine. Then it left. For the German authorities, the raid didn't carry the destructive force of a bomber formation. It wasn't designed to. Its strength came from scale and location. One aircraft over the capital of occupied France, appearing where an occupying power expected to control the sky, the streets, and the symbols beneath them. The first tricolour was the key. A gun attack could be described as a raid. A flag released over the Arc de Triomphe carried a different message. The crew had brought no French troops, no liberation force, no guarantee of imminent rescue. They brought a visible national emblem to a monument associated with French sacrifice and memory. That was why the exact landing point matters emotionally, even though history can't confirm it. Whether the flag came down on the Arc, near the tomb, or elsewhere in the monument's immediate area, Fern had released it over the place the crew intended. Gatward's own account makes the aspiration clear. The tomb of the unknown soldier was where they wanted it to be. The aircraft couldn't stay long enough to know. That limitation is almost the whole story. The Beaufighter had to keep moving. Its safety depended on speed, low altitude, surprise, and the fact that no enemy fighter or anti-aircraft gun succeeded in stopping it before it left the city. Gatward and Fern could create a moment, but they couldn't remain to control what happened afterward. They didn't know why the parade was missing. They didn't know where the first flag finally settled. They didn't know how many people on the Champs-Élysées looked up. They didn't know what the German naval headquarters reported after the cannon pass. What they could know was what they had done. They had reached Paris. That distinction separates Operation Squabble from the legends that later gathered around it. It isn't a story about a single Beaufighter defeating a German force in the middle of the French capital. It's a story about a two-man crew using the reach of one aircraft to make occupation look less absolute. The planned parade attack had failed because the troops weren't there. The symbolic mission had not failed. Its clearest achievements remain intact. Fern released the first weighted tricolour over the Arc de Triomphe. Gatward flew the Beaufighter along the Champs-Élysées at extreme low level. The crew found no parade. Gatward then fired the aircraft's 20mm cannon at the German naval headquarters in the former Ministry of Marine, and Fern released the second tricolour. Afterward, the same aircraft reached England and landed at RAF Northolt at 13:53. That is a remarkable sequence of facts, without adding a single invented casualty, a cancelled parade conspiracy, or a flag draped perfectly over stone. The unanswered question remains: why was the parade absent? The available account does not tell us. The German troops may have been cancelled, delayed elsewhere, or never scheduled as Allied intelligence expected. The surviving evidence can't choose among those explanations. But the operation's meaning does not depend on solving that mystery. Gatward and Fern had taken off from Thorney Island with a plan to strike a German parade and place French colours at the heart of occupied Paris. The parade disappeared, the flags didn't. The first tricolour fell from a Beaufighter over the Arc de Triomphe. The second followed cannon fire at German naval headquarters on Place de la Concorde. Then one Beaufighter turned west, crossed the Channel and came home.